it! We got her!
Rusty Grab, here we come! Can we say that plants from Texas are dumb? Can we say that shoes from Texas are dumb?
Okay, Patrick, that's enough.
Why? Do you think that old slowpoke Texas is gonna...
The Hillbilly is the most underrated killer in the game. Whereas he's nowhere near top tier, the effort you put into mastering him is rewarded with pure dopamine. Keep in mind what you're getting into though. Billy is also the most mechanically frustrating killer in the game. You will often feel like not playing him anymore and just going back to your main. But don't give up. Rome wasn't built in one day. And I promise you, learning him is worth it. And if you don't believe me, here are some clips to get you hooked on this wonderful killer. The Hillbilly is a 4.6 meters per second tall killer with a 32 meter terror radius. He's as average as you can get when it comes to M1s, but he excels in mobility and especially the chase thanks to his chainsaw. The chainsaw allows you to instantly down survivors, which is especially great against the current meta of Dead Hard and Circle of Healing. Base kit, it allows you to move at double your movement speed, but we'll later go over why that isn't enough. It requires you to charge before activating, and while doing so, your movement speed is slowed down. After the first seconds of increased turn rate, it will turn very slowly. This is why you want to avoid charging into a survivor from a distance. A smart survivor will take advantage of your pathetic turn rate to dodge the chainsaw last second, or go behind an object. Sometimes you can get away with predicting what direction the survivor is going to dodge, but that isn't very reliable. This is where the first mechanic comes in, 99ing. Unlike Demogorgon's Shred or Plague's Vomit, the chainsaw instantly activates upon the bar filling up. Experienced survivors have the chainsaw charge time memorized, and are ready to dodge all of your attempts at hitting them. To counter this, you want to keep a balance at around 99% of your chainsaw meter, and only release once you're confident you'll get the hit, which almost always means being really close to the survivor. In order to successfully 99, you want to keep a pace of around 5 to 6 clicks per second on your M2. Going too fast or too slow will either release the chainsaw sprint prematurely or cool it down redundantly. Just like you don't want to look at your feet at the ball when playing soccer, you do not want to focus solely at the chainsaw bar. Once you get it down, it becomes muscle memory. However, a survivor won't just allow you to hit them. 99ing is only half of the game. The rest we refer to as back revving. It is the act of revving your chainsaw right behind the survivor and reacting to their jukes accordingly to confirm a hit. There's 3 types of doing this. Firstly, around a small object. This is the simplest type of back revving. You want to zone them behind a small object such as a tree or a rock, and keep your chainsaw 99, then fake one direction and immediately use your increased turn rate on the other. Think of this as a bait and switch, but be careful not to turn too hard, or you'll end up bumping into the object. Secondly, in the open. Back revving in the open is slightly trickier. The survivors have 2 main ways of trying to dodge: spinning or wiggling. A spinning survivor will almost always go in one direction only. Once you identify that, just track them and release immediately. A wiggling survivor is trickier to counter, as their pathing is more unpredictable and really hard to track. Therefore, you want to keep an eye on your bar and make sure it is perfectly 99, and release as soon as the survivor inevitably enters your field. Typically, when back revving in the open, it is optimal to look slightly down to get a better grasp of the survivor's path. The third way is at a locker. As a Hail Mary, survivors will sometimes jump into lockers as a way of dodging your hit. Be prepared for this. Survivors will almost always instantly come out of the locker, thinking you'll let your chainsaw cool off. You want to be facing the locker 99ing your chainsaw, waiting for the survivor to jump out. If this doesn't happen, there's two ways of handling it. Either take a gamble of when to let your chainsaw cool off and mash space in the process. Or, if your chainsaw is close to overheating, you can keep it 99 and mash space at the same time. As soon as it overheats, you'll instantly grab the survivor. Speaking of overheat, it was a mechanic introduced in the 4.1.0 balance changes as a nerf to the Hillbilly, but sometimes you can make it work in your favor. Other than the prior mentioned locker trick, it is also a good idea to overheat your chainsaw after you've ended a chase, if it is already close enough to doing so on its own. While overheating, the chainsaw cools off faster, so by the time you have hooked the survivor, your chainsaw should be back in action. However, let's not only talk about the sad part, let's talk about the good part as well, add-ons and perks. When it comes to Billy add-ons, you almost always want to run at least a single engraving, either yellow or green. This makes you 10 times more lethal with loops, and is required if you don't want to be back revving the game, which is not only inefficient, but also boring. When it comes to your second add-on, it can either be a second engraving or a wildcard, a tuned carburetor, low pro chains, or an overheat add-on if you're a beginner. Any other add-on is either a meme or complete garbage, so don't worry about those. When it comes to perks, my biggest and unironic suggestion is Shadowborn. And no, this isn't a joke. Shadowborn not only helps with your back revs, but the extra 15 degrees of FOV give you a better understanding of the survivor's placement and pathing in loops, and of your own positioning and when to release the chainsaw. More on that later. Another great Billy perk is Bamboozle, which is amazing for training wheels and is required at a competitive level. Billy's biggest weakness is by far windows, so having a perk to shut those off makes your life 3 times easier. Other great Billy perks are info perks, such as his very own Tinkerer, but also Barbecue, Floods of Rage, and Lethal Pursuer. His insane mobility allows you to take full advantage of such perks. More on that later. Gen slowdown perks are also good on every killer, but Billy benefits especially from passive ones, such as Ruin, Corrupt Intervention, Overpain Resonance, which allow you to always keep the ball rolling and constantly pressure survivors. Chase perks like Enduring and Brutal Strength are also great, because they allow you to disrespect pallets, enabling a more aggressive playstyle. Generally bad perks on Billy are ones that activate on basic attacks. Surge, Save the Best for Last, Dark Devotion, and other similar perks you will not get much value out of, as you will be mainly using your chainsaw. And do I need to explain why insta-down perks are not a great choice? The Hillbilly has one of the greatest mobility abilities in the game, rivaled only by the Blight, Nurse, and the Oni. To get full value out of such raw speed, you need to learn how to angle your chainsaw. As demonstrated by these 2 clips, in the first one, I am unable to make it past the van due to my turning rate, but in the second one, even though I started at the same position as the first clip, I am able to make it past the van due to me angling my chainsaw at the beginning, abusing my initial turn rate. It is also great to use your chainsaw for mobility during a chase to catch up if the survivors hold W. Angling your chainsaw is only possible if your controller sensitivity is set to 100%. Otherwise, your chainsaw will not turn as much, and your angle will be unsuccessful. However, mobility isn't the only thing that abuses the Hillbilly's initial turn rate with 100% controller sensitivity. Finally, we get to the spicy part, the flicks. This is the reason engravings are so important to your playstyle. Playing Billy is a game of distance, and engravings cut it substantially, allowing you to get hits you wouldn't normally get. The most basic type of flick is an omlit, and you nail this by getting used to distancing. For the most part, you want to abuse every single split second of increased turning rate that you can. This means not flicking instantly after releasing the chainsaw sprint, slightly afterwards, allowing you to gain extra distance both pre and post flicks. Here are some demonstrations of optimal and suboptimal distancing. The more advanced type of flick is the 180 degree, which is a misleading name. This flick is started by a pre-turned angle, so practically it's more of a 160. To perform this, you want to flick as hard as possible, as soon as possible. If done right, you will have turn for every second available during your increased turn rate stage, which leads into a sharper turn compared to a 90 degree. This is harder to do, but better, because flicking earlier also means giving the survivor less distance to make it to a safe part of the loop. As I said, flicking is a game of distance. Don't intentionally lose it just to get the flick. If that happens, don't force it out, but continue looping and start over. The most important part about flicking is also sadly the one that cannot be taught: rev timing. Other than a few precise spots that we'll go over later, timing is something that you'll learn with practice. Finally, I do not recommend the use of Q&E for flicking, as it makes the timing way more frame perfect and precise than it has to be. Once you have the mechanics down, flicking is applied differently depending on the type of loop you're playing at. Generally, you can divide loops into common universal tiles, which are short walls, long walls, T&L walls, Pallet Gyms, and shack, and junk tiles, being in the shape of a rectangle, square, or triangle. We'll go over the latter first. Rectangles are your best tiles by far. Usually, the shorter the rectangle, the better, as it allows for easier mind games and it gives less distance to the survivor. You always want to rev on the long side of the rectangle, tracking the survivor on the other side, and always keeping the chainsaw bar 99. This is when you start mind gaming. Go one direction, then the other, and so on, until you realize you've got the survivor in a position where they're as close to the short side of the rectangle as you are. This is when they've overcommitted, and when you yourself commit to that side of the rectangle and flick, either with a 90 or a 180 degree. A common mistake is getting too creative with mind games before having mastered the mechanical side. You want to make sure you know how to consistently and proficiently land each flick before going crazy with mind games. When it comes to which of the long sides you should rev on, there's usually two factors you have to consider: the pallet side and the obstacle side. You always want to prioritize the obstacle side to anything else, as revving on its opposite side will cause you to bump on said obstacles, ruining your flick. If there are no obstacles on either side, you want to prioritize the pallet side. This makes it so that survivors can't camp the pallet or get a cheeky stun or drop before you get the hit on it. However, mind gaming does not always work against experienced survivors, especially on glorified rectangles. This is when you start looping the tile conventionally, and only start chainsawing as you approach the pallet. If the survivor drops it, you either break it, or if the tile allows it, curve around it. If they greet it, you get that juicy flicking. Another common mistake is the tunnel vision mind games. Just like any other killer, Billy gets stronger with a fewer amount of pallets on the map, so don't feel bad for forcing one out. There also exists a particular type of rectangles, slippery ones. In these tiles, the short side of the rectangle has no collision, and you will therefore slide on it. This allows you to completely ignore the short side of the rectangle and pretend it doesn't exist. Such examples of these tiles are the cards on Baten or Overheating, and the snow pile or omlit. Because of this special property, mind gaming is always viable. Get crazy. Squares are trickier rectangles. You cannot apply the same principles, as the survivors will get too much distance and your curve will fall short. To counteract this, there exist two ways: faking your chainsaw or reverse 180ing. The former is pretty self-explanatory. You cannot walk the entire length of the square while revving, as you are slower than a survivor while doing so. Therefore, you want to start looping the square conventionally, Then fake your chainsaw right before going over the pallet. This will make the survivor greedy and not drop it. After faking your chainsaw, you catch up to the survivor and immediately start revving again. This will lead into a perfectly timed curve, either ending in a pallet break or a hit. The other way is trickier and less reliable, but can be a nice ace in the hole. As the survivor is on the opposite side of the square as you quickly turn around and do a perfectly timed 180 to meet them at the other end. By the time they realize, it's already too late. You can apply square principles with trickery or rectangles to force out pallets or get back revs, such as these awful tiles on Macmillan. Triangles are the worst out of the 3 types of jump tiles. If you're facing a good survivor, you will not get a chainsaw hit on these. They're squares, but worse, as they do not allow for conventional curves. To get a hit on these tiles, your best bet is to apply the same principles as a square tile, and if that doesn't work, either try getting really creative with mind games, or give up and force the pallet. Now we move on to universal common tiles, starting with short walls. Short wall jungle gyms can be confronted in 2 different ways, depending on whether the survivor decides to vault the window or not. If a survivor vaults the window, you want to do a 90-degree curve around it, meeting them on the corner at the other end. For double engravings, you should start revving as soon as you go past the locker on the outside. If a survivor does not vault the window, you are able to do a 130-degree-ish curve, meeting them at the pallet side. If you have double engravings, you should start revving as soon as you enter the outside part of the loop, going clockwise. If a survivor is on the outer part of the loop, you can fake going one way and then curve the other, but be wary of lockers and other such obstacles that might get in your way. Now we move on to the easiest out of the 5 universal tiles, Pallet Gyms. The latter mind game can be applied to Pallet Gyms as well. Fake one side, then curve around the other. If a survivor drops the pallet, that's when it gets even better. Do not break it immediately, as drop pallets turn the tile into a big rectangle. First, try to identify if the survivors camp in the pallet or not. If so, you can curve around the long side and catch them as they're vaulting the pallet. If they continue to loop it, get creative with mind games, so they cannot see you over the tile. If nothing works, you can always break the pallet and zone them to a worse area. It's important to mention possible pallet backzooms. When playing around a drop pallet, you don't want to perfectly curve into it, but you want to curve into it at a 15-degree angle. Long walls can also be approached in 2 ways. If the survivor vaults the window, you can loop the tile counterclockwise, curving around the long wall and meeting them at the end of it. If you're using double engravings, you should start revving as soon as you're opposite of the pallet. If you have enough distance for it, or you know the pallet is no longer in play, you can beat the survivor to the window, but be wary of corn attacks. If the survivor is on the outer side of the loop, you can apply the same mind game mentioned with short walls. Next up are T&L Walls. These are the trickiest tiles to curve as Billy out of the 5 universal tiles, and there is no reliable way of doing so other than hard reading the survivor. One way is to force the survivor around the outside of either the T or the L. Make them fake the window by moonwalking with your chainsaw up, then curve at the long side of either the T or the L. You can also stand still on the short side of the T or the L facing one way, and then curving the other as the survivor makes the turn. These are both reads, so if nothing works, then winning is justifiable. Now it's time for Shack, which is actually not that complicated to play as Billy. If the survivor vaults the window, you can curve around the outside and guarantee your hit, even if they try vaulting back. If you see a survivor go one way of the shack while you're on its opposite side, it's worth a shot going for a mind game like this. A nice curve spot is when you're chasing a survivor from the outside and they're about to vault the window from the inside. Here, if you're running double engravings, you can start revving as soon as you go past the window frame. It'll be perfectly timed to 180 right on the window, guaranteeing absolute pocos. As things are drawing to an end, we move on to the advanced section of the guide. If you're going for clips, or facing a particularly good survivor, regular mind games or rev timing are not going to cut it. However, First you need to identify whether a survivor is good or not, and if they know what they're doing. You can most commonly recognize this if they go wide. A survivor aware of Billy's curving capabilities will go wide when caught overcommitting. Next time that occurs, you can call them out on it by also going wide. In some tiles, it is possible to cover going both tight and wide by giving up distance for an acute angle curving inwards. A good survivor will also swap tiles. In situations where you need to curve in order to get a hit, if a survivor knows they don't have enough distance and they are unable to go wide because of a bottleneck or as a mix-up, they will swap tiles completely. It is a very risky play, basically reading your curve. If you see this coming, don't tunnel vision the flick, but keep 99ing for a bit longer until you see them swap or not. At that point, it's down to back rev. Once you've realized you're up against a good survivor, or you just want style points, the two most common and reliable advanced mind games are reverse 180s and 360 walls. We mentioned reverse 180s when talking about square tiles, but we didn't go too much in depth about them. You want to give away distance to the survivor and loop conventionally while revving the entire time. Once you go past the short side, you turn around and instantly 180. If done right, you'll meet the survivor right on the other side of the loop. 360 walks are more straightforward, but more mechanically demanding. You need to commit to one direction, but make the survivor second guess themselves and hesitate by doing 360s while walking, as shown in PiSk. And that's all I can personally tell you about the Hillbilly. Hopefully I've said enough to convince you to play the killer I have so much fun with. Remember to never give up, and that mastering him is the best investment you'll ever appreciate in this game. Good luck on your journey, future Billy mains. I'll see you at the top.